Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, a lot of the content I've been sharing with you over the last several videos has been about the pattern we've seen in the Pacific. And the front half of the month of November, so in other words, the 1st to the 15th, featured an anomalous ridge right in this area. It was sitting in the Gulf of Alaska. As we then moved to the second half of November, that ridge moved farther to the west. And I'm curious about the position of the jet stream across the Pacific Ocean because it has been the setup of that jet stream that's given us this. You see, this map shows you precipitable water compared to normal. These colors, the warmer colors, represent wetter than normal, and the bluer colors here represent drier than normal. And what we've had is a real lack of high precipitable water amounts here, which is showing us a lack of a subtropical jet stream, and also here as well. And in order to make any sort of a change overall in our drought situation in the western part of the United States, we've got to be watching for a pattern change in the Pacific Ocean. So to put this into a more statistical view here, November 1st through the 15th, total precipitation ranks by climate district. Hurricane Eta, well, what was left of it, as a tropical storm cut across Florida and then eventually went here and met up at the stalled out boundary over the eastern part of the Carolinas up into Virginia. And as a result, saw incredibly heavy rainfalls there early in the month. We did have quite an active storm track through here, bringing in quite a bit of snow from Nebraska, Iowa, getting up into parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. The jet stream running over the top here brought in big snows into parts of the Pacific Northwest as well. But it was dry in Texas to the lower Mississippi River Valley and also dry in the Northeast. Getting into the second half of the month, one place that continued to stay dry here was parts of the northern plains, as you can see. But big change for parts of the mid-Atlantic, getting back to the Appalachian Mountains, and a lot more precipitation into this part of the Midwest. But overall, when we look at these maps, I want to be thinking about how much we saw a change in the drought monitor. The snows made significant improvements in the Northwest, but without that strong subtropical jet stream component to the flow of the atmosphere, we saw degradation in the drought across the western part of the United States, specifically California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and also down here in parts of Texas. There was improvements in this region and in the Northeast toward the end of the month. But overall, the concern is about that drought in the West and what it's going to be doing throughout the rest of this winter. Now, basin average snow water content is a good map just for us to start checking in on. These numbers here are in percent of normal. You can see that throughout much of the Pacific Northwest, our basin average snow water content numbers are looking really good early in this season. Even here in the Sierra Nevada and the Klamath Mountains, which we don't have reporting stations in, we did get some big snows in the second half of the month. But notice the numbers here in the Four Corner states up toward Wyoming are still sitting well below average. Now, this map is far more important to be diagnosing once we get into February, March, and even the beginning of April. But we're going to keep an eye on it moving forward. Over the last 7 days, though, the flow has been relatively weak through California, hence the lack of precipitation, even in the Northwest as well. And that system that did come through here, putting down quite a bit of snow in parts of the Colorado Rockies, still is keeping the numbers below where they should be. It was very wet in the days leading up to Thanksgiving right here in the Midwest, and the recent storm system that has come out here, really following that southern track going through parts of Texas over through the lower Mississippi River Valley is the thing that's going to be making a lot of unsettled weather here in parts of the Ohio Valley and the Northeast in the coming days. But over the last week, very dry in the southern Canadian prairie, getting up into the northern plains of the United States as well. And that's something we're going to see if it continues to be the pattern moving forward. Let's talk temperatures. The beginning of the month was extremely warm in this area. Some locations in the first 10 days of the month setting some all-time warmest conditions, and that goes back 128 years. But overall, when we just blend together the beginning of the month, which is on the left, with the second half of the month on the right, it's hard to find an area outside of the Pacific Northwest that saw sustained below normal temperatures. Now, we have had some cold mornings in the Central Valley of California, bringing in some untimely frost there. But outside of that, much of November is going to be remembered as a warm month. Well, there's big change in that coming here in the near term, and we're going to be talking in a few moments about the frost conditions that are going to come down to the south central, and southeastern United States. But as that low goes racing here up toward the northeast, winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings out, and also very strong winds and severe storms are going to be moving here through parts of the southeast toward the mid-Atlantic. And once again, another frost event down here in the San Joaquin Valley. What's got this all set up is this strong branch of the jet stream here that comes across the Pacific, dives into a trough just south of the Aleutian Islands, so big low going to be happening in the Gulf of Alaska. But then the pattern gets very bunchy, with the northern branch of the jet stream doing this, and a southern branch here. The problem for California is that southern branch comes off of a split between Hawaii into the Gulf of Alaska. So this is not the setup to return the moisture. But as this jet streak and this jet streak round the base of this deeper trough, we're going to rapidly develop a low here in the Ohio River Valley. Let me show it to you. It's sitting right here midday today. And that low is not only going to bring some strong winds and thunderstorms to its south and cold air on the backside, but a lot of snow as it stays stacked up vertically in the atmosphere, which is going to prevent it from moving very quickly toward the northeast. So let's talk about it. Last night into early morning this morning, that's how things progressed. Now the trick throughout the morning this morning is going to be to watch the temperatures drop off from Indiana to Ohio down to Kentucky and Tennessee. That will be where the transition will happen from the rain over toward the snow. To the south, where the front dips through, watching for scattered showers and thunderstorms, some of which could be severe today. And as this pulls through, we're going to notice just two things really quickly here. Early this morning, one push of moisture coming into the Pacific Northwest. Some mountain snows here, possibly some mixture over towards some freezing rain and sleet here. Look at this in the in the Columbia Basin. Watch that carefully. I'm talking about Tri-Cities up toward Yakima in that area, this region. But coming back over to the east, now we notice that by mid-morning, 8 a.m., it appears that right through here is where the transition will be. As we move forward throughout the day, the trickiest forecast today will be to find the back edge of this. We're just going to have to watch the radar, because if you were to the east of that line, 2 to 5 inches of snow is going to be the name of the game. To the west of it, maybe just a couple of snow showers is all we're going to expect. There will be some lake effect, though, coming off of Lake Michigan. Now, we notice that throughout the day today, getting into the evening hours, watch as I go from Monday evening now, as the main branch moves to the north here. Watch as I go from Monday evening into Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and evening. As that low stacks up, we're just going to continue to get very strong winds and also plenty of moisture wrapping around this low. When I say stacked up, all that means is that the surface low is sitting directly beneath the upper level low. They need to be staggered as you go up in the atmosphere to pull one ahead of the other. And that's just not happening. They're just going to sit there. So around Lake Erie, right in through here, I'm expecting a lot of snow. Our next system starts to take shape once we get into Wednesday morning right here in the Red River Valley. You can already start to see it pulling the moisture to the north. But we're going to continue to see the lake effect snow around that system through Wednesday. So it's a multi-day snowfall event in this part of the country. To see where it goes from there, let's switch over to the European model. As I stated, very windy conditions around this low that's developing this morning and pulling toward the northeast. Let's pause it Wednesday morning where we just got to in the previous run. Still see the snow here, and I'll give you the amounts in just a few moments. But with high pressure behind this, there's going to be a lot of cold air that sinks down into Florida through the southeast. And it is going to have enough cold air that on the northern edge of this low that's developing here, we could see snow initially here in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and then possibly getting over into the Ozarks here as this weak low begins to take shape. But it loses its upper level support from Thursday afternoon and evening, now moving into Friday morning. And you see that high pressure dominates, and that just becomes this kind of open wave and a weak frontal boundary that moves here across parts of the southeast. It could regain some strength toward Friday evening as it moves here into parts of Georgia, North and South Carolina, where it could possibly bring in some wetter weather toward Friday night into Saturday morning. But after that, the atmosphere builds a massive ridge into Canada, and throughout the weekend into early next week, outside of some snow down here in Arizona and New Mexico, and some lake effect snow here in the northeast, and a little clipper system that runs here through the Canadian prairie, it's going to be a pretty boring setup into early next week. So with that, let's now diagnose what we're talking about in terms of total accumulated precip. I want to look at the liquid side of this first. We're going to let this run all the way out here until we get, let's just let it get through the weekend. How about right there? That takes us out to, let's stop it here, Sunday evening. We do expect, with those storms coming through here, the possibility of locally 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches of precipitation. So that's coming right in through the Carolinas, through the mid-Atlantic. I'll show you the snow in a few moments, which is what a lot of this is going to be. But our second system brings a lot of heavy rain, where we just saw it down here in eastern Texas to Louisiana, and we might see some snow piling up here in parts of Kansas over into Oklahoma and Texas. Meanwhile, look north of that. From Illinois to North Dakota, up into Saskatchewan, Manitoba, very dry conditions in through this area. And without that subtropical jet coming through, California continues to miss out on precipitation. Snow. Here's our snow map through Friday evening, looking at it for the whole U.S. and southern Canadian prairie, getting over to Quebec and Ontario. What I want to do is I'm going to zoom in here on what we're expecting out of the first system. The operational European model possibly putting down in this area upwards of 10 to maybe locally up to 18 inches of snow. I do believe that in the area that I'm kind of circling right here in parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania, that this area will see a good 2 to, in some locations, upwards of 8 inches of snow. The 2-inch snowfall boundary, I think, is well resolved in the model, cutting all the way down into parts of Tennessee, Kentucky here, enhanced by elevation in the Appalachian Mountains down here on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee. But get up into parts of Ontario. Look at this, heavy snows right in through these fields in this area, so be ready for that. Possibly 6 to 10 inches here as we get some lake effect. The second system we need to talk about here comes through the Ozarks and also might possibly bring in quite a bit of heavy snow back into this part of Oklahoma and Kansas. I'll show you that in a few moments. But first, what about the ensemble? The ensemble is in great agreement with the operational on the snowfall here. So take a moment and pause the video. This would be what I would draw as my final snowfall map out of this system this week. It's a pretty solid forecast here. But notice the differences once you see the system that's second coming in on Wednesday and Thursday here. Let's zoom in on it. We see that the ensembles are in disagreement overall on the heavier snows that are coming through the Ozarks. This will be the tricky spot to be forecasting. But they agree on a 2 to 4 inch snowfall event here with possibly some locally heavier amounts right in through this region with the second system that emerges again on Wednesday through Thursday throughout the day. So that's what we're looking at this week. Now, why the models are in disagreement, they're not really pinching off a really strong low right in through this area. See that? It's more of just an open wave transporting the moisture. We need to get much stronger circulation to see the heaviest snows to show up here and also in this area. What the models are very much keyed in on is this big high pressure cell that's on the back side of it. That's going to sweep through and basically dissolve that low as it gets forming here. So a lot of uncertainty, even just 3.5 days out in the forecast. Now beyond that, where's the pattern going? Well, we're going to be seeing the evolution of something called the positive phase of the Pacific North American pattern. And I want you to look down here to show you what happens when we have the positive PNA in November and December. You see the jet stream comes screaming across the Pacific around this low and north of this high, so very fast winds. But then it builds into a large ridge that goes over Canada and then dips back into a trough that extends here from Texas over to the Ohio Valley. This ridge right here is key to the development of positive PNA. And look at this. The positive PNA pattern is going to really show up as we go into the first several days of December, but then drop back off very quickly after that. Now, we can't forecast the PNA beyond, we can't forecast it well beyond about 10 days. So it's really this big change toward a high positive value and then watching it collapse that I think is going to be critical to understanding this pattern. Take a look at it. By December the 7th, look at the jet stream flow coming around the trough here and the ridge that's just off the screen. Here is the big ridge that denotes that positive PNA pattern. But as we suggested, look down here to the south. There's the low cutting over the next week out of Texas, or excuse me, out of the Four Corner states and then across Texas. But there's a second feature we got to talk about, and that's the persistent troughing over the northeast. Because as you go out to day 10, we lose the positive PNA pattern. Can you see it? There's just no longer any highly amplified flow coming out of the Gulf of Alaska to Canada. And instead, the jet stream is doing this, digging into a deep low here with a large ridge building up into the North Atlantic. And that is the negative phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation, which is going to take over. So in the near term, it's the Pacific, and in the long term, it's the Atlantic that's going to dominate this pattern. Now, what does it do? Well, the jet stream is going to come across like this into week 2, and then it's really going to accelerate here and then run up into a big ridge. Now, the problem with that pattern is nothing coming out of this area. So what we end up getting in our week 2 pattern is the wettest conditions going into British Columbia, not into the west coast. And where the second piece of the jet stream takes off here, that's where we're going to be getting the wettest conditions, right along the coast going up into the Canadian Maritimes here. So a drier pattern here and a drier pattern in the west. That's your week 2 forecast. Let's talk temperatures. Through November the 1st, we had yet to see frost getting down here into the southeast or even into much of the Central Valley of California. But with several of these cold air intrusions, look at how this map has changed from November the 1st to the end of November. Again, you can see the extent of the cold air in gray now occupying much of California, and we're about to see this area here and this area here see their first frosts of the year. The All Hazards Weather Map has a freeze warning out for these locations, and it will extend into Florida as we go through this week. And yet again, frost conditions here in the San Joaquin Valley of California. Let's take a look at what it looks like here by looking at our minimum temperatures. The numbers represent the minimums. The color shading tells you the difference from normal. As we go from Monday here, where it's very cold in the Central Plains, but quite warm in the southeast, we go from Monday into Tuesday. This is where you see that white line? That's my 32-degree line. We will see freezing temperatures almost all the way to the Gulf Coast and cutting into this part of the Florida Panhandle. Going from there into Wednesday, this might be the greatest extent of our coldest air into the southeast, possibly coming in just north of Orlando here. So a frost into this area. But after that, going from Wednesday into Thursday, and now into Friday and Saturday, as we work our way into the weekend, can you see the positive PNA pattern taking over? The cooler air stays here with the much above average warmth occupying not only here in northern U.S., but into the Canadian prairie as well. You can see that by looking out at the day 5 through 10 pattern. It's doing this. Look at the trough here in the big ridge, keeping much above average temperatures in that area. Both the GFS, which is the one I drew on, and the European show the same thing. So the cooler pattern across the southeast is going to hang on for the next 10 days. But where this goes beyond that is still very much up in the air. The GFS, which lately has been underperforming, has got this whole pattern advancing and getting out to the Atlantic. And that's why you don't see much of a contrast in temperatures. But the European, which has had much higher skill scores, has kept the warmth here and the cooler weather in place, and it's got a much slower progression of this pattern moving forward. So, is there any changes happening in the Arctic? Well, I want you to watch over here on the left first. The polar vortex, as we work our way into December, might move off into a wave 2 pattern. In other words, it might split. I'll just take you back there to 2 separate waves deep in the stratosphere. But it regains its composure. And as a result, the forecast for the strength of the polar vortex wanes a little bit like this, and then jumps right back up. What's important is it's still well above the zonal average winds for that area. It's a weakening where it would drop down like this that we'd be most concerned about, but it's not forecast to do that over the next, at least start of December. We have to watch later in December and January for any sort of significant polar vortex disruption, which I'm not picking up on right now. So what we turn our attention to is the tropics. Our La Nina, quite robust. Southern Oscillation Index has recovered over the last month. These ocean temperatures hovering between 1 and 1.5 degrees Celsius below normal. And this La Nina is really dominating the trade wind pattern. You can see the blues in through here. Those blues indicate strong trade winds going off in this direction. Right around 120 east is where they're meeting some westerly winds here, and therefore right on 120 east is where we're getting our best rising motion. While this is not necessarily solidly associated with the MJO, it is important to see that that's where the best rising motion is going to be, and there'll be sinking motion here. Now, why I discuss this is that over the next 15 days, that's going to lead to better upper level support here over much of South America for rising motion. And what's critical about that is that this is going to change the precipitation pattern over what it's been to one that's going to be a bit wetter. That map over there on the right shows you the last 30 days of precipitation anomalies for South America. And it's been very dry. Now, the new graphics I got over here on the left not only show you 2020 compared to normal, but also put on there 19 through 15. So 2020 is this bottom line here, and there's currently about a 10.5-inch deficit compared to normal. A year ago, we were wetter than average, as you see up here. And notice that when you look back, 2019 to 2015, 2020 has been the driest year we've had in the last 6. We had a very dry period at the beginning of November and then again over the last 10 days or so. And there's concern about what that's doing to the first crop here in parts of Mato Grosso, which is where this analysis is for. Over the next week, we continue to see a weakened monsoon. It's wet in southern Brazil, Paraná, getting down to Rio Grande do Sul, Paraguay, and also northern Argentina. But into week 2, we are going to see better monsoonal support from Mato Grosso over toward Goiás, Tocantins, Minas Gerais, Mato Grosso do Sul, while it gets drier in Argentina and southern Brazil. We'll keep an eye on it. Keep seeing how this transition occurs through December, January. Keep a close eye on that crop in South America. Thanks for your attention. Have a great week.